Hello everybody, welcome back to another video by Jay Bowman. Today I'm looking again at one of my favourite synths, which is the Mask1 by Kodamo. I've got the OG keyboard version here. Hopefully what I talk about in this video will also be relevant to the new EX1, or the 1EX, which has just been released, and I know that some people have received their copies, so that's good news. Also good news from Kodamo that they're going to do a further run of the desktop version. I don't know if it's going to be called the EX as well, this further run, but I like the fact that more people are going to be able to get hold of the Mask1 engine. And so what I want to do today is look at some recent patches which I've designed for the Mask1. I had some family staying with me recently, which meant that I didn't turn this keyboard on for a week, basically. And then after they left, I turned it on the other night, and my reaction was, wow, I always forget how good this thing sounds. So there were some patches I designed before they came. I've done a couple of new patches since they left. I released a video recently playing some of those patches. So what I'm going to go into in this video is just take a look at those patches, break them down, see what's going on in them. The Mask1 is very quick to program, which is obviously an advantage, but the other thing is that almost as soon as I've programmed the patch, I completely forget how I came up with the sound. So this will be a journey of exploration for me, probably as much as for you. The other reason I wanted to make this video is I've recently got a new camera, so I don't know if this footage is going to look any different. I'm interested to see what difference it's going to make. So that's basically the video. I mean, theoretically this new camera means that I don't have a limit on time recording anymore. So I guess that's a bit of a warning. This video might go on for longer than my usual videos. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. Probably a bad thing in terms of me editing them. So I've got, in theory, about 5 patches to go through, but 5 or 6. Let's see how we get on for time. So the patch you just heard me playing at the start of this video is called J Basic. I think it sounds quite nice. It sounds quite organic and analog in the fundamental tone, but then it's got this weird digital kind of sheen on top, which is not atypical of the Mask1, I'd say. So people who've spent a bit of time with the Mask1 can probably recognise that the digital sheen on top is coming from the bit crusher effect. So if I go into effects 1, we can see the type is bit crusher 6. Now, some of the bit crushers, as you get into the higher numbers, actually have an LFO built into them, so they'll go between different bit crush settings. But I don't think I'm doing that because Bitcrush 6 doesn't have that built-in LFO, so I'm using one of the LFOs to modulate the Bitcrush effect. Let's see. Yeah, so LFO 2 is modulating FX1 type using a random wave, speed of 10. So that's that effect that you hear. If I turn it off, then you just get the standard bit crusher sound, which is less effective. I mean, I think the bit crush modulation there gives some movement to the sound. And I obviously liked the sound of modulating from with a random LFO rather than, I think the LFOs which are built into the higher bit crusher sounds are more standard LFO types, wave shapes. Yeah. Just at different speeds and from different positions. So, coming back to this sound, I would say that that effect is too prominent, really. I would like to probably turn it down a bit more from 15. Let's go to 5. 5 or 10 maybe. I mean, that is an issue with this synth, that you have relatively little granularity on the parameters. And the parameters you do have are well chosen for being musical. But that's an example of where I might want 7.5 really, rather than 10 or 5 for that effect. Let's also talk just momentarily, while we're talking about shortcomings of the system, about the LFO wave of random, which is what I'm using in this LFO. I just want to bring this up because there's a bug in the system at the moment that means that when I was talking about the limited granularity, so here you have 16 values for speed, but unfortunately value 1, the slowest value, does not work. So if I put it on 1, there's just no random modulation from the LFO. If I put it up to 2, then you can hear it does work. 1 just doesn't work, which is a shame because it would be really useful to have the option for doing really slow random modulation. And I have raised this with Kodamo a few times, and I think they have promised to rectify it in the next firmware update. But it would be really great to have that option there for sound design. A slow random LFO would be ideal. Okay, so we've talked about the kind of digital sheen that's coming from the effect. Let's just quickly check. There's a bit of reverb. It's a short reverb, you can hear it there. Very nice. The reverbs in this thing are really nice, really high quality. I'm just going to apologise at this point for the background noise as ever, which is the guinea pigs I share my studio with. Okay, so we've talked about the digital sheen on top. We talked about the FX. What's the core sound? I mean, just listening to it and looking at the oscilloscope as well. It's quite a sine wave type sound. Is it a sine wave? Probably not. It's got too much character for that. Is it the half sine? Here we look at the list of prominent masks. 15 half sine, my favourite shape. Could it be that? I don't think so, because if we go to the FFT, I don't know if you'll be able to see that with the lens I've got on, how small that is in the screen, but you can see that quite a lot of the harmonic series is there. So let's have a look at what wave shapes we actually are using, or bit masks, I should say. So mask 1 is the sawtooth, hence all of the harmonics. And just for people who are new, obviously we have this list of prominent masks on the front panel, and 7 we can see is the sawtooth, so hence we know that oscillator 1 is bitmask 7 sawtooth, oscillator 2 bitmask 6. Let's hear what bitmask 6 is, because it's relatively unusual for me to use that. And obviously we've got some filter going on, so let's get rid of the filter. Just turned off the reverb. So bitmask 6 is this rather nice sounding shape that's part way between a sawtooth and a square. It's got the overall fundamental shape of the sawtooth with the kind of jagged edge like a sawtooth. But then within the sawtooth itself, it's got these kind of square wave, MIDI square wave type shapes. So that's bitmask 6. It's not one that I use very often, but looking at it and exploring it there, I can hear there's something really interesting in that sound actually. So I'm going to come back and try and make some more sounds using that. I think if you just speed through the bit masks quickly, which is what I often do when I'm doing these videos, when I'm playing the Mask 1, you might just go through it and say, okay, sawtooth. But actually focusing on that, I think there's some interesting potential for bitmask 6. Right, so let's go back to the sound as it's constituted. So we have the interplay, or rather the 2 bit masks, 7 standard sawtooth, 6 which we've just explored. So look at the volume, 7 is a lot louder than 6. So the sawtooth is the fundamental sound. So it's playing an octave above where it normally would be, because standard pitch for bitmask 7, as we know, is -24. It's playing at -12, so it's an octave higher. But then, as you could probably detect, bitmask 6 is playing a fifth above that, by 7 semitones higher. So that's just boosting that harmonic and the series above it. So yeah, as I say, the interplay between those two. interplay between them is making quite an interesting sound. Is there any noise? No. Let's just quickly finish with the bit masks. Actually, with the oscillators, there's no movement going on there, so it's a static sound. So the movement is coming from the FX, as we just explored. Let's look at the filter. I'm going to turn that effect down a bit. Yeah, so the Mask1 filter, completely digital, but lovely sounding. So the cutoff is down at 20, no resonance, low pass mode, as you'd expect, no tracking, and it's in 24 dB per octave mode. Let's hear how it sounds in 12 dB per octave mode. dB. Very nice, they both sound really good. Okay, so I think the only thing left to talk about in this patch is I've obviously got some modulation from the velocity. So velocity is modulating the filter envelope at the full amount, so 15. It's a really playable patch. I don't know if that's coming across through the video, but that velocity setting is one of my favorites. It becomes very expressive. I mean, the synth is marketed as having these very expressive play modes, you know, like paraslur, things like that. I think, as I've said in a previous video, I don't tend to use a lot of those play modes. I tend to stick either to poly or mono. But even with the traditional play modes, the keyboard and the synth itself seems to have a very organic feel, and although I've mentioned the limited granularity of the settings, you do feel like you have a lot of control over expressivity with the limited mod options that you've got. So obviously the filter has quite a full envelope. I mean, interestingly enough, I think the filter envelope is probably the setting which has the most granularity, because you can go from plus 63 to minus 20. So that's what, 83, 84 values, which I think is the most, well, apart from bitmask, which has, you know, 512 values, but the filter has a lot of values in there. And once you get into the higher values, they tend to be pushing the cutoff far above the audible range. And people have asked on the Kodamo forum why the range goes so high. I don't want to answer for them, because, as again, I'll say I'm not affiliated with Kodamo in any way, but in my view, I think the reason is because you've got this expressivity setting where you route volume to filter envelope. So having a very high setting gives you a lot more control there. If you have a high velocity setting, then you've got a lot of room, a lot of range for dynamic change there. It's yeah, so that's this patch. Probably not a huge amount more to say, apart from the fact that if you'd asked me beforehand if it had any resonance on the filter, I'd have said I think so. And there isn't any resonance, so I think it's must be the interplay of these two bit masks at the different pitches they're playing at that gives the illusion of resonance, because it's reinforcing certain harmonics. Maybe that's it. But sometimes resonance on a filter has a kind of harsh or has an effect that I don't like. But that sound has all of the kind of good, the good quality of resonance on the filter cut off without having the bad effects. So that's interesting. Yeah, just double check. Yeah, no resonance. Okay. Let's move on. And let's look at a different patch. So where are we? 94. Let's quickly look at this patch. Now this is one of the patches I played in that video I released recently. And one of the interesting features of the Mask 1, which I mention quite frequently, is that obviously each oscillator, the noise and the filter, has its own envelope. And that gives you the potential to make quite complex sounds within one layer. So let's talk about how this sound came about. Sometimes for inspiration, I look at the front panel. On the Mask 1 OG, you have this list of prominent masks. And I thought, okay, 120, which is a kind of a pulse wave. I don't often explore that sound. Let's make a sound using 120. So that's what this is. So as you see, Mask 1, bit Mask 1, oscillator 1 is 120, the pulse wave. Let's turn off oscillator 2. So you get a kind of harpsichord effect from that pulse wave. Obviously I've done some stuff with the tail, which I'll talk about later. But then the sound itself has these two components. So obviously the harpsichord from the pulse wave is the first percussive attack portion of the sound. And then the sustain and release portion of the sound is Mask 15, which, as people who've seen my channel before will know, that's one of my favourite masks. It's the half sign. And that is the kind of body of the sound. So if you just play in the attack portion, you'd never know that the half sign is there. So obviously we've got on the pulse wave, the harpsichord bit, we've got no attack, quite a longish decay, and release. So that's there at the start of the sound. And then For the sine wave, it's got a longish attack. So the two sounds, the idea is they kind of crossfade one to the other. Then a long decay, maximum length decay, and a long release as well. Okay, there's no noise. Oh, just to double check, you should always double check. There's no bit mask movement or modulation going on there. No noise. Interestingly, there is some filter, and it's the low pass filter. Low pass in 12 dB per octave mode with a little bit of resonance. So the cutoff is set halfway down, and that is just cutting out some of the really, really high end. If I open it all the way, it's quite subtle, but it is just taking the very, very top off the sound. Then what's going on in the LFOs? So we have LFO1 modulating frequency. So that is that is making vibrato, and what I've done is I've put a delay on the effect. Because obviously you don't want the harpsichord to have vibrato on it, that would be awful. So the vibrato only kicks in as the half sine comes in. Now, one of the things I've raised, I mean, Kodamo have improved the delay and decay settings for the LFOs from when they first released the synth. I can't remember if they've made them longer, but they've definitely made them fade in more smoothly. So hopefully you can hear how the vibrato comes in. It's quite musical. There is still a slight bug with the delay and decay settings, because if I set the decay at 14, so the idea is the delay fades the LFO in over time, and then the decay fades it out. Now I've set the decay at 14, and you don't hear the LFO at all, because I think these values, delay and decay, are running concurrently. So because they're running concurrently, it's fading in but also fading out at the same time, so you never hear it. Obviously the way it should work is you have the delay portion and then you have the decay portion, like attack and decay or attack and release. But at the moment they seem to be running concurrently. So that is a bug which Kodamo need to fix to make the LFO even more useful. I think I have raised that, but maybe not as a bug report, just as a feature request. I'm not sure, I can't remember. And obviously LFO2 is going to FX2 balance. So FX2 is delay 1. So you're getting that glitch effect as the LFO on a random wave is modulating through the different delays, and that is causing that glitch because the different delay settings have different time values. Hopefully that makes sense. There's a lot of delay and decay going on here, and there is also a delay on the LFO2 settings, just like the vibrato. So this effect fades in, it affects the half sine portion of the sound, it doesn't affect the harpsichord portion of the sound. That might be a bit extreme again if I turn it down. Okay, I think we've talked about that sound enough. Let's go down to 92. So this is quite a nice sound, a ton of bass coming through I can hear. Yeah, you can see there on the FFT that fundamental's really strong, which makes me suspect that we're using the half sine. Let's have a look in the oscillators. Oh, okay, oscillator 1, 7. As we know, that's the sawtooth. So it's the same arrangement as we had on the other sound we looked at, so we don't need to talk too much about the oscillators. So the difference in the sound is coming from the effects mostly, because here we're using a chorus. Rather than the bit crusher effect that we were using on the other patch we looked at. And what else is going on? So the filter is closed a bit more, or there's not as much filter envelope. Okay, interesting just to see how different that sound is from. So obviously 94 evolved from 92. Yeah, so those are two evolutions of the same sound, really. Oh, something I did want to talk about actually is the getting a bit more into the way that I tend to program on this synth. So let's go back to the spike patch, just briefly, because what I wanted to say is, obviously this patch started with me trying to use this 120 pulse wave in a patch, and this sound is what came out of that. Part of the strength of bitmask synthesis is how much variety you can get just from modulating one parameter. And obviously, as I said earlier, the bitmask position itself is the parameter that has the greatest amount of range and granularity in it. So just by changing the bitmask for this attack portion of the sound from 120, we can hear how it how much it changes the sound. So let's just go through. Hopefully by going through the bitmask in that way, you know you're into bitmask synthesis when you listen to each of those sounds and you think, oh, okay, that could be the basis of a new patch, or I could just change the patch in that way. I mean, sometimes the changes between each bitmask are very subtle, like the difference between 120 and 121. That's quite subtle. I mean, that's the difference between opening or closing the filter very slightly. But then we go up to 124 and we're in a very different kind of harmonic content there. As I've said before in previous videos, that is the kind of first dimension of bitmask synthesis. And then we might start to say, okay, well, what about the movement between these bitmasks? We can hear that 120 to 124 are quite closely related to each other. How does it sound if we go from 120 up to 123 and then loop round? Let's try that. So we've gone from the first dimension of bitmask synthesis to the second dimension. Now, to really explore this, we need to focus on the attack portion of the sound. Let's make it sustain. So you hear that? It's almost kind of a vocal, kind of like I mean, there is a vibrato. Let's obviously turn the effects off, the LFOs off. So that bit mask movement is giving a kind of vocal quality to me, even looking at it on the oscilloscope. It's got a kind of vowel or formant quality to it. Let's change the loop from yes to bidirectional. Let's go down from 120 to 119. Okay, so we can see how the second dimension of bitmask synthesis, it's a bit more involved, requires more tweaking, more exploration. And I'm not going to get into all of that on this video, but something I just want to mention is that there's a difference between the way the two looping features of the bitmask delta envelope work. The yes seems to go around in a more predictable circular movement, whereas the bidirectional is kind of swinging from one to the other. But it doesn't spend an equal amount of time on each bit mask. I've noticed that it just kind of touches the ends and spends more time on the ones in the middle. So there's little details like that that can help you when you start to try and explore the patching and really dig into the bitmask synthesis engine in that way. Right, let's go back to what we were exploring. I'm not sure how much more time we've got. Maybe we'll just look at a couple more patches. Okay, there's one another one I played on the video is this one. Call it J weird for now. It's some people will say, what's the point in that kind of patch? It's not very musical. One of the things I'm doing at the moment is making some music for a side-scrolling 2D shoot 'em up, and so I do have an interest in kind of alien sounding or unusual FX type sounds like this. Probably more so than someone who's just purely making music. So this sound could be useful for me. You might say this sound is quite an unusual sound to be able to get from a keyboard polysynth. It's more of an experimental sound. I mean, that's a kind of generalization, because I know that even with my Prologue, for example, which is very basic synth in some ways, you can get quite unusual tones out of it, especially when you get into audio rate modulation. So let's have a look at this patch. What's going on? I suspect that it's a combination of audio rate modulation of various things combined with the effects, which gets you this kind of sound. I will also say there's a way of coming up with random patches on this synth, which I don't use a lot. I've only used it a couple of times, but it did come up with some very interesting results, and possibly playing with that would get you to this kind of sound sometimes. But when I made this sound, I did very deliberately set out to try and come up with something weird like this. So let's have a look. Let's have a look at the envelopes first of all. So both oscillators are sounding. Oscillator 1, let's isolate oscillator 1 for now. So that's the kind of weird tone, whereas oscillator 2 is a sine wave. Okay, so that's how the two oscillators break down. You've got the kind of hum, melodic sound on oscillator 2, which is giving you some pitch information. You could take that out and just have it as purely a FX type sound. But I quite like having the combination of both. Okay, so bit mask for oscillator 1 is right up at 512, so 511. Right at the top of the series. It's playing at quite a low range because, as we've seen, as you go up through the bit mask series, every 32 or so, or 15 or 16 values, you effectively drop an octave, which is one of the reasons why there's such a great octave range in this synth. So really, if I want to play this bit mask at a kind of standard pitch, there you see, you need to raise it up to 24. Where it has this kind of nasally vocal quality. So by playing it down at 0, it's got that weird sound that you can actually make with your voice. I mean, this bit mask does sound quite vocal to me. In fact, if anyone's familiar with the ODB album Return to the 36 Chambers, he's singing at the start of that intro. His voice starts very, very, very low and then he goes up. And that is what this sound is. It's the sound of singing so low that your vocal cords just go into the clicks. Anyway, a bit of a weird diversion for Wu-Tang fans there. So we're starting 16 below and we're going through the bit masks. So that is also giving some of the quality of this sound. So let's raise it up again so we can just hear what's going on more easily. Okay, and let's tweak the delta envelope so we can see what effect that's having. So there, yeah, that is second dimension bitmask synthesis, and we can hear how changing the range has a drastic effect on the sound. You get discontinuities when you go over certain ranges. Typically above 16, you're getting into a kind of different sub-series of the bitmask. So by staying within that range, we don't have those discontinuities, but what we do have is a kind of smooth-ish change between bit masks. I will say there's a very slight discontinuity because, as I mentioned earlier, with the bidirectional loop, we're swinging and we're just touching the ends very briefly. So I don't know if you can hear that as it swings, it just touches that end and there is a very slight discontinuity. And if I reduce it to 15, that goes away, I think. Or at least it's not as prominent. If I go to 17, you can hear those discontinuities at the end, what I'm calling discontinuities. We don't really have a vocabulary to properly discuss what's going on here, but that's what I'm calling it. So the discontinuity is right at the start. So it's swinging down from, well, it's starting 17 below and then going up. And right at the start down there, minus 17 from 511, that's where the discontinuity is. There, if I stay safely within the range, there's no discontinuity. At 16, the discontinuity is there, but it's very small because, as I say, the bit mask loop, when it's bidirectional, just touches the edges. Anyway, that's really getting into the nitty-gritty of second dimension bitmask synthesis. Let's have a look at changing the speed, what effect that has on the sound. Okay, so if I take it out altogether, okay, it's an interesting sound. There's a lot going on and I've not really isolated each element there properly, but hopefully hearing that difference shows you what the bitmask envelope is actually adding to the sound. So here's with it on, with the loop on. And here's with it off. And there we just did the third dimension of bitmask synthesis, i.e. we're changing the speed of the envelope as we play. And that's where I want Kodamo to go with their next update. I'd love to be able to have control of those, to modulate the speed and the bitmask envelope using velocity, using the LFOs, using a specific mod envelope. That would be ideal to be able to modulate those. You hear how cool that sounds? I'd love to be able to get into that. It would really take the synth to another dimension, literally, and I think that's where they need to go. Anyway, enough on that. So there is some noise playing. In the noise setting, you have the frequency. Setting, so I've reduced that to 73 just to take the edge off it. So it's quite subtle down there in the mix. And let's look at what else is going on, because there's a lot going on in this sound. Filter, so we've got the cutoff down, high resonance, using low pass mode with some tracking at 12 dB per octave. I'm just playing with the cutoff there and it's having some interesting results. I mean, a patch like this, sometimes I think there's no right or wrong answers. That does make some interesting sounds if I reduce the cutoff further. And I think if I was going to try and tailor this sound for specific usage, I'd probably be looking at the filter cutoff there and seeing where I actually want it. Now, I was going to say, I could tell that there is some looping envelopes in the amp sections. The fact that the sine wave is looping, I don't think is adding particularly very much, because it's quite a long, slow loop, because the decay is 13. So when the amp envelopes loop or the filter envelope loops, it's the attack and the decay portion that loop. So that's quite a slow loop for oscillator 2 for the sine wave, whereas the filter has a fast loop because it's attack of 0 and decay of 4. And by changing the decay, you hear the difference that makes. Not quite an audio rates, actually. You hear again how by focusing more on the filter, reducing the cutoff more, having this filter envelope go into audio rates, you can really play with the sound. Take it into a different direction. Okay, I think the last thing we need to look at, so in fact, it's not the last thing because there's so much to consider in this patch. So LFO1 is doing nothing until I modulate the mod wheel. So that is bringing in this LFO, which is changing FX1 type at audio rates. So let's look at that. So we've got chorus 16, which I think is a flanger type effect. And the interaction of the flanger with the kind of all of the modulation we're going on is what's making that that sound, that's giving it that kind of vocal quality. Yeah. So you hear the flanger that's quite slow going there, and then as I turn up the mod wheel, it's going from flanger to the other chorus type effects, possibly up into distortion as well. But at an audio rate, I mean, I think that's another feature that's quite unusual of the Mask1. I know that on some other synths, the FX parameters are destinations for modulation, but the way you can change between different presets at audio rates with the Mask1, which I've used in a couple of patches I think we've looked at today, I think is quite unusual and great from my perspective. I mean, that's some things you lose on the Mask1. You have very little choice of FX parameters. You can't individually modify the speed and the depth of the effects. You're given effectively presets that you choose between, but you do have some interesting options to then modulate between those presets in an interesting way, which I think it would be difficult to do on another synth that gave you more control of the parameters. It would be difficult to do that without spending a ton of time on editing and really getting into the nitty-gritty. And then lastly, let's look at LFO2, which is just adding vibrato. So I think we've looked at this patch, we've probably done it to death. I think it's an interesting sound. Now, there's a question, what other synths could you make this sound on? Probably some of the deeper synths you could have a go at. I remember when I used to have my Continuum with the Egan Matrix, I only really scratched the surface of that thing. And I imagine that with a synth like that, where you can really modulate everything with an incredible degree of flexibility and control, you could make a sound like this. Another synth that I'm interested in is the Kronos, and that might be something that I look to get next year possibly. And I suspect that with the Kronos and the control that gives you over wave sequencing, etc., combinations of sounds, you probably could come up with a sound like this. But the programming experience with the Mask1 to come up with an experimental patch like this, it's difficult to describe the different patching experiences on different synths, but I find patching on the Mask1 very enjoyable, obviously. That's why I'm making these videos. It allows you to get very deep effects from a very shallow interface. And once you know the areas to really push on, the unique areas like I've described, modulating through FX parameters at audio rates, modulating filter oscillators at audio rates, and then most importantly, using the bit mask series and modulating through those bit masks, often at audio rates, that really gets you into some really interesting places quickly and simply with one knob, no screen really, apart from this LED display, which is very useful. But one thing I'd say is that this synth is made to be used by visually impaired people, for example. I think one of the best demonstrations of this synth is by, I think it's Jean-Philippe Riquiel, who's playing it literally for the first time, from what I understand, live on stage, and he's able to get great sounds out of it. But also I think even editing it, you'd be able to get great sounds out of it and get into it in a lot of depth, even if you didn't have this screen, because you know if you push the button where you're going to start in the menu. And it has got, you can turn on an audible sound. It'll give you a beep, I think, when you get to the end of the menu to help people who are visually impaired. But also, again, that would give you the option to do really deep editing with no screen. I'm kind of going on a tangent here, but I'm trying to explore what it is about this synth that is really exciting and interesting. Okay, let's look at one last sound, I think, and I'm going to try not to talk about it for too long because this video has been going on for a long time. The camera is holding up, so that's interesting. There's no limit on how long I can record, which is a warning, I think, for future. So this is called J-Tongue, and what I was trying to do here is replicate the feeling and the sound a bit of playing a kind of steel tongue drum, which with a kind of rubber mallet, which gives you a lot of control over kind of ratcheting of melodic sounds. Obviously it's very difficult to get the feel of playing a physical acoustic instrument, percussion instrument like that from a polysynth. So I'm not actually going to go into how I made this sound. I think once you spend enough time with this synth, you probably get a few ideas how you could make this kind of sound with the Mask1 engine. It's not marketed as a physical modelling engine, but with the features that you've got here, some of which I've explained in this video and in previous videos, you can take it in that direction, and you can get pretty far. So that is another side to the Mask1. Even reviewers who were slightly dismissive of the Mask1 have said that the keyboard is a very responsive feel to it, and I'd agree, and that is key to making a sound like this work. I mean, I don't know how it comes across really to viewers on YouTube or whatever. But a patch like this is really nice to play for the player, even if it's not so nice to listen to for the listener. So maybe if you've made it this far and you want, we could play a little game. You could give me some ideas in the comments as to how you would make this type of sound using the Mask1 engine. I doubt anyone will make it this far in the video, but it's quite unusual as well, because I like it up here right at the top of the keyboard. And right down at the bottom as well. That's quite unusual for a synth patch in general. Yeah, so if you've made it this far, thank you very much for watching, first of all. Please put in the comments how you would make this sound on the Mask1 using the parameters that we've got here. Even better, if you've just got a Mask1 OG or a Mask1EX, why not have a go at trying to replicate this sound on your synth? Post a video, I'd love to see it. That's all I'm going to say for today. Again, I'd say thank you very much for watching. As always, please give me a like and subscribe, and I'll catch you on the next video. Goodbye for now.